Welcome back to the Done Deal Show with Ben Jacobs. Hit the like button, subscribe, make sure the bell notifications are turned on. Benjamin, how are you, my friend? You well?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm on transfer window duty, but I'm also on dog sitting duty. So if you hear barking and whining, it's not me at the questions. It's two dogs behind me that are absolutely nuts. Otherwise, all good, though.
Good. And no better place to start with the breaking news of today. Tottenham sign Dragusin, and Spurs fans very, very happy, very, very excited about this because they've also had Bayern Munich reportedly rejected in the process. Tell us about this deal, the type of player that he is, and what Tottenham fans can expect, Ben.
Yeah, very Ange Postecoglou type signing, ball playing, defender, confident and composed, and exactly what Tottenham need: depth and discipline, and a cultured kind of modern defender that can also win his fair share of aerial duels and have an impact in both boxes. So Tottenham are absolutely delighted with this one. I think that the market's been a bit misled by Nice's Jean-Claire Todibo because Tottenham saw him as a priority and maybe the build-up to the window. Chelsea have been linked, as have Manchester United. But my understanding is that that was never really possible, and Spurs opened talks and found that very quickly because the price would need to be around 60 million euros. And even then, Nice might say no because they're challenging for Champions League football. So Tottenham moved very quickly to Dragusin, and they were always optimistic. I know we heard some reports in the last 48 hours that Bayern were getting closer. And obviously elements of that proved to be true because Bayern made a formal bid. And in doing so, they made Spurs sweat a little bit. But the legwork that Tottenham had put in paid off because prior to Bayern coming in, Tottenham had already agreed terms with the player. And also, Genoa had actually prepared the documents when Bayern finally made a formal bid. So it's a package of around 30 million euros. Jed Spence is also going on loan to Genoa. I think that sold it to Genoa in many ways, although they did accept the Bayern offer as well. And then this morning, the formalities are being completed and Dragusin is heading off to London. So Tottenham have had a good start to the window because Timo Werner has joined on loan as well from Leipzig. And this transfer was a bit more of a saga. But ultimately, when you give a player a consistent narrative and when you show you're prepared to bid quickly and resolve their future in the early part of the window, and when you have a manager like Ange Postecoglou who gives a very clear vision to players, all of that adds up in the end. And I think Bayern, even if the player was tempted by that kind of project and ultimately Champions League football, I think it was too late in the process for Bayern to change Dragusin's mind. So as always reported, Tottenham were optimistic on this one, even when Bayern made the bid. And now they've made two signings in the first 10 days of the window, assuming that the formalities and the medical goes according to plan.
Yeah, Strasbourg Steve here with the Super Chat says, this is an excellent signing for Spurs. This guy, Dragusin, is going to be the envy of many in the Premier League. He's what he was Genoa's player of the year, in my opinion. And Strasbourg Steve, I will say this. This is I know you'll come across this a lot, Ben, on social media. People that pretend they watch a lot of all the leagues. This guy sent me pictures. On a Saturday afternoon, he has about 10 screens set up in his bedroom with all the different leagues. Like, legit, this guy watches everything. So I trust his opinion. When it comes to Timo Werner, that was also an interesting one because nobody was really talking about him, but they got it done quickly. Quite a big fanfare when he arrived. There is I believe there is an option to buy clause for them. Both are these two players very much big Ange Postecoglou signings, players that he thinks he can really get the best out of.
Yeah, I think that you got to give everyone at Spurs a little bit of credit, particularly Johan Lang as well. But by the same token, Postecoglou has had a fair amount of input, and that's partially down to the fact that at the period when he joined, Tottenham hadn't really built a team that had started. Even someone like Scott Munn, that was known to be incoming, hadn't actually arrived at the club and started. So Postecoglou has had a lot of say, and it's normal as well because good clubs window plan. But if you're Tottenham and you had a plan coming into last summer or this January, it was framed to an extent, even though they kind of knew he was outgoing, around Antonio Conte. And not only that, but even after Conte leaves, you're left with Conte-type players. And not all of them are suited to how Postecoglou likes to play, with this high line, composure, sweeper keeper, very gung-ho in many ways. And this is why the manager and his philosophy needs to have big input, because it's a massive change from Conte ball to Ange ball, if you like. With Werner, it was obviously about Son and depth and Asian Cup. But the buy option tells you, as I've reported, that Tottenham still see this as potentially for the long term. And it's like a win-win situation in many ways, because last season, Werner played something in the region of 40 games and got into double figures. I think it was 16 goals in all competitions. This season, just 2 goals in the Bundesliga and only 8 appearances. So he needs game time if he's to be in contention for the Euros. And Tottenham need depth and versatility. And they feel like even when Son returns, they can still use him in different areas and positions. And the beauty as well with Son is it's exactly the same. Harry Kane leaves. I don't think we can call Werner a Kane replacement at all, because very different. And I think that in the summer, Tottenham will still be looking to, in inverted commas, replace Kane. And by replace, I obviously mean in terms of profile. I think Kane himself is irreplaceable, but you're looking for someone in that Kane type model. But for now, you've got the opportunity to play Son wide, and then Richarlison can lead the line. You've got the chance to move Son into a more advanced position where he was very effective with James Maddison, who's coming back from injury. You've got the chance to incorporate Werner in a variety of different positions across your front line. And Manor Solomon is still to come back as well. And I think when you look at a number of those players, that V-word versatility is something that they've all got in common. So it's obvious that Postecoglou likes to chop and change and have players move and switch sides and be able to adapt. And by adapt, I don't just mean to injuries or your starting formation or any of your pre-planning. I mean within game management. And whereas maybe at the moment at Chelsea, Mauricio Pochettino is being challenged for his game management, for his substitutions, I think Postecoglou's had no real choice. His hands have been tied by injuries and circumstance. And now he'll have a bit more depth. So we'll start to maybe see Ange the tactician coming through. And I'm intrigued when everyone's fit to see who he puts where. Because I still think that Son has actually benefited from Harry Kane leaving. And if Son can lead the line and Maddison can come back, I think that was the partnership that got Spurs top of the Premier League. Whereas if you let Richarlison lead the line, you can argue he got 5 goals in December in the Premier League. So why not? But then Son's going to be wider. And I don't think with Maddison also in the side, he's as effective. And you've got to factor in Werner as well. So it fascinates me beyond, let's say, mid-February, because at this stage, Postecoglou is going to use Werner. His hands are tied. Son's away. But if we look at a stable Spurs post window in mid-February until the end of the season, who starts? And it's really difficult because Son is the first name on the team sheet and he's the captain. And Maddison is one of the first names on the team sheet. Again, that's your core. So then how do you bring in all of these other players? And we're going to have to wait and see. But I think Spurs are sport for choice, but they're also riddled by injuries. And at the same time, they're not actually that far off first place. So it's going to be really intriguing to see how they perform in the second half of the season.
It certainly is. And Spurs fans were asking for quick business to be done, not leaving it to the end of January. And they've got that. Stragsball Steve here says, the only question I have for Dragusin isn't the switch from Italy to England. It's going to be going from playing in a back 3 to a back 4 on a high line. I don't worry too much because he steps up and makes good decisions. I appreciate those super chats regarding this subject. Hit like buttons and share, people, please. Manchester United. Pursuit of an attacker. Timo Werner's name has been mentioned. Choupo-Moting's name has been mentioned. I want to make sure I pronounce this guy's name. Guirassy has been mentioned. What's the latest there? Boniface? What is the latest there in terms of Man United striker pursuit, in your opinion, Ben?
Not much update. Just on Dragusin, by the way, you're absolutely right in what you say, that Genoa predominantly play this 3-5-2 formation, but he can play anywhere within that. I've watched games where he's been in the center of a back 3. I've seen him move to the left. I've seen him move to the right. And he's very good at recovering positions when he realizes another centre-back is being pulled away. So I actually think that he'll really relish the opportunity to play in this high line. And I think he'll fit fine into a back 4. I don't think that transition will be a problem at all. With Manchester United, I'm not really expecting too much, if I'm honest. There's a possibility, obviously, that they could bring in a striker. But for me, it's going to require the exit of Anthony Martial. I don't think that the imminent Sancho loan to Dortmund, his return, is really going to generate enough capital to allow Manchester United to move definitively within the market for the kind of profile that they're looking for. Serhou Guirassy could be one to watch, but I think the feeling from my Stuttgart sources is that he's going to stay. There's a 17.5 million euros release clause, but it means absolutely nothing if the player doesn't want to go. Clubs can't just trigger the clause without the player's buy-in. And because he's at the Africa Cup of Nations, I think it's going to be quite tricky in this instance to persuade the player to move. And because of AFCON and also the Asian Cup, this is maybe why with many of the players that are being spoken of as potentials, we are seeing a lull in the market, because much like a Euros in the summer, players don't really want to handle going away on international duty, coming back and moving. They also know that they need rest, so they can't really integrate, and it's mid-season. So it's really challenging to get a player like that. But there is ultimately the release clause. And if Manchester United can find the funds, they might try their luck. I know that Newcastle have considered Guirassy as well, but both of these clubs have to find the 17.5 million euros or somewhere around that if they choose not to try and trigger the clause. And at the moment, I don't think Manchester United have got that kind of capital. The other thing is that Manchester United have a so-called transfers plan. It's written that way in the agreement with Jim Ratcliffe. And Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos have approved that transfers plan. And it's relatively conservative because Ineos don't want to panic buy. They don't want to define decisions that maybe can wait until summer 2024. And they also want to build their recruitment team first before making any major decisions. And with Rasmus Højlund being the young striker, we know they need experience and potentially some proven Premier League quality. So unless the right stopgap emerges, I think we're going to get into a situation where maybe Manchester United wait. I don't think that Guirassy is possible. I think a linked player like Jonathan David is only going to be one to watch for the summer. And Manchester United need to focus on outgoings first. So the only chance I feel Manchester United have got of moving for a striker is if two exit. At the moment, they've got Sancho out, and now they need to maybe try and find a solution to have one more outgoing before they can move in the market.
I'm loving those dog toys. Loving it. My puppy ain't here right now, but he is just as noisy. He really is. I get it with Man United. It's frustrating as a Man United fan that we know we've got these issues. We know we've got everything going on. I did want to get your opinion on the situation and the story regarding Blanc today. There was a lot of speculation he would become the new CEO, and a very confusing article really for a lot of people from The Athletic today that sort of suggests that he'll be involved, but nobody quite knows what his role will be. The new CEO will be picked between the Glazers and Ineos. What's your understanding of that situation, and how is that? Do you think that's going to be an impactor for the January transfer window?
I think this is just evidence of what I've said before, which is that Ineos are not going to rush any decisions. What you have to understand is that there'll be a strategic review that might last somewhere close to 100 days. And that's inclusive of planning that's already taken place now. And that is being led by Sir Dave Brailsford. So until you've done the review, you don't know what you need. And Manchester United, as I've said many times, may well employ a sporting director and a technical director or some kind of head of recruitment alongside the director of football. And then in addition to that, the CEO is quite a complicated appointment because Ineos can't just proceed on their own terms as with a football decision, because the CEO is not only a football appointment, it is a role that encompasses every different aspect of the club. So the Glazers, if they vote collectively as a six, can ultimately outnumber Ineos. And one wonders if this is the first bit of, loosely speaking, debate or friction, because the Glazers are happy to hand over football control, but do they want an Ineos person as CEO? Or does that actually give Ineos and Ratcliffe too much control? And it's all very well saying that the Glazers can vote as a six, but not everything goes at board level and is based on voting power. So if your CEO is an Ineos person, then it bridges the gap between football and commercial and football and brand. But maybe the Glazers feel a bit threatened by that. So I think that Jean-Claude Blanc will be involved, and there's still a very realistic chance that he is going to be the CEO of the football club. But it might also be more like a kind of Behdad Eghbali role, whereby Eghbali doesn't really carry a title like Todd Boehly does as chairman, but he holds all of the power. And why? Because he's kind of day-to-day at the club, but he's representing the majority owner. And there's a very realistic possibility that that is what happens with Jean-Claude Blanc. The title is not important. The point is that he represents the majority owner. And in doing so, he becomes a highly significant member. We know that he's on one of the two boards, and we know that Brailsford will be heavily involved as well. The other thing that Ineos need to think about in all of this, which is, I think, an underrated point, is that there is still the question mark over Nice. And there will be scrutiny, even if the rules are relaxed. And because of that, we have to wait and see whether Manchester United has to be billed as Ratcliffe project and Nice has to be billed more as Ineos, or alternatively, whether Ratcliffe has to consider reducing his own stake in Nice to make sure that he fits in with all the rules. And everyone made a big furore about Sheikh Jassim in the build-up with QSI, even though QSI always denied that they were involved. We know that Nasser Al-Khalifi wears many hats and was certainly involved in the consultation process, but everyone made a big kind of fuss about how Sheikh Jassim could well be under the thumb of the Emir, and the Emir's sports arm is QSI, and QSI have PSG, so how is that possible under the rules? And much less was said about Nice and Manchester United. Now, of course, in fairness to Ineos, they would say they know the rules, they know the balance, but it is sporting control, and therefore it's influenced by legal definition. And Nice is ownership and influenced by legal definition. And Nice are challenging for Champions League, and Manchester United's aim is Champions League. So there's a lot to be resolved, and it may well be in terms of who is given a title that Manchester United and Ineos have to be wary of that, to make sure that structurally and legally they stay within the rules. So my information is still that there is a very realistic possibility that Jean-Claude Blanc could be the CEO of Manchester United, but titles are not important. You may remember that Joe Shields, Lawrence Stewart and Paul Winstanley all came into Chelsea with different titles to they have now. And then the model was assessed and two of them were bumped up to co-sporting directors. So the titles don't really matter. It's more the dynamic that's important.
Yeah, of course. Well, I've seen it in a separate scenario. Sometimes when I worked in the banking world, somebody would be made redundant and then they'd recruit somebody into that position, but the position would have a different title because legally they couldn't employ someone into a position that they just made redundant. So yeah, some of this is going to be playing things around. And Strasbourg, Steve, here, another generous super chat. He says, I think with the Man United and Nice situation, it will be treated like AC Milan and Toulouse, who both played in European competitions. Thank you there, Steve. I appreciate that super chat. Any questions about Man United, feel free to send them in to us, ladies and gentlemen. Super chats, member chats will always take the priority here, and we appreciate each and every single one of you. Obviously, last night was another painful night, really, for Chelsea and their rebuild and life under Todd Boehly and Clear Lake. They're not out of the Carabao Cup, but losing 1-0 to a championship side in the first leg is going to be painful. A lot of their fans screaming for transfers to come in. There are some exits that are on the cards. We know that Maatsen has gone out on loan. Still, there's a lot of question marks hanging around the situation with Conor Gallagher. What's your understanding about his potential exit in January? Has that changed much in the last 7 days?
No real movement. It was not correct to my understanding, despite some reports in Italy that talks had started with Spurs. What's true is that Tottenham tried for Gallagher on deadline day, but their package was a maximum of 35 million and Chelsea wanted about 10 million more. Now I think Chelsea are looking for 15 or 20 million more in terms of the total package. I'm told that 45 million guaranteed plus bonuses is the type of offer, depending on structure, that might turn Chelsea's head. And the reality of the situation is that Chelsea are quite dispassionate here. They have a policy that if the player's heading into the final 18 months or year of the contract, they're for sale. Now, that doesn't mean that they're actively offering Gallagher, but they'll listen to offers should they arrive. At the moment, no offer has arrived. So it's going to take a large amount of money if Gallagher's going to go this window. And at the moment, there's no progress. It's true that Gallagher would like to stay and fight for his place. It's true that Pochettino values Gallagher as well. But within Chelsea's model, if an offer comes, then it won't just be those two that take a decision. And it's obvious that Gallagher could say no, But that's just a stopgap. Maatsen said no last summer when Burnley had an offer accepted, and now has obviously been loaned out to Dortmund. And it's likely that he'll be sold in the summer. So players can change their mind. It's all very well saying you want to fight for your place and you want a new contract. And Mason Mount was the same. But if a new contract doesn't arrive, you start to think, what's the point in constantly saying I want to stay and fight for my place if the club are not going to offer me a new contract? So all options are still open with Conor Gallagher, but I think it's more likely in January that he stays, barring an offer of kind of total package 55 or 60 million. That's what Chelsea would ideally want. Maybe 3 or 4 million less, they might still consider it. But at the moment, there's no movement. And it's really hard to see how Spurs, having not wanted to pay more than 35 million, would suddenly consider an offer at around 55 million, despite that admiration for the player. The other consideration in all of this, which is partially why the freedom to challenge and debate is so important in Chelsea's model, is Pochettino's perspective is the now, because he's under a little bit of pressure. He's only got a 2-year guaranteed contract. The 3rd year is at the club's discretion, and he's nearly halfway through that. And he's likely to be assessed during the summer. And if Chelsea were to get knocked out to Borough, then there'll be even more pressure on him naturally. So Pochettino's thinking about the now. And at the moment, Conor Gallagher, along with Cole Palmer, is one of Chelsea's best 2 players. He's also the captain in the absence of Reece James and Ben Chilwell. So you can understand why Pochettino's thinking Chelsea would be nuts to let Gallagher go. But if you flash forward 6 months, or if you just do a hypothetical now of everyone's fit, and Chelsea might even bring in another midfielder, then I think if every Chelsea fan gave their desired starting 11, I think Conor Gallagher would only be in the starting 11 for 40 or 50% of those starting lineups. I think most Chelsea fans would pick Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo. This is not a hypothetical based on form now or injuries. This is just flash forward 6 months and judge each player on their maximum ceiling and then pick your best Chelsea 11. I think in that midfield too, most would have Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo. So then Gallagher is probably challenging with Lavia, with Leslie Okwuchukwu, and one more midfielder. And maybe Chelsea's board are thinking long-term, in 6 months' time, Gallagher won't be picked for captain because Reece James might be back and Ben Chilwell will be there, and Gallagher won't necessarily be picked on form because Moises Caicedo will be in the mix, and he played really well last night. He was probably the one positive for Chelsea. Enzo Fernandez is well liked, and Romeo Lavia hasn't even had a chance to prove himself. So you can understand why in the long term, even though it sounds ridiculous now because he's playing so well, some people at Chelsea might still feel like Gallagher will drop down the pecking order. And this is why there's still a chance at the right number that Gallagher could be sold. But if I was a betting man come the end of January, I think that it is more likely that Gallagher will remain. And then we have to work out whether there'll be a new contract, because if there isn't, then he'll almost certainly be sold in the summer if he doesn't leave in January.
Yeah, it's all a little bit... Again, it all feels a little bit messy at the moment. As you say, you've got this situation with Chelsea where Conor Gallagher's starting a lot of games, but there's, the club seem open to kind of selling him. Poch is obviously thinking short term because he's got a short contract and he hasn't made the improvements yet. But Chelsea have to think, in my personal opinion, more on the long term. It's almost, you've got 2 opposing forces working at the same time, and that's never really going to help, personally, in my view, in terms of creating the kind of cohesion that is needed. And there's a question here from Mish, one of our members, that says, how has Poch not been sacked yet? Well, I know you're very close to Chelsea. What's your feeling towards their support of him as manager?
Well, I think that Pochettino may be scrutinised by the fan base, but is clearly not the only factor in Chelsea's inconsistency. So if you're going to scrutinise Pochettino, then game management, Levi Colwill at left back are definitely 2 very valid points. And substitutions have come under, I think rightly, a bit of scrutiny. But there's been injuries, and it's not the manager's fault if Chelsea keep creating big chances and missing them. The irony is they got more goals than under Graham Potter, but they should have twice as many goals. And if they had twice as many goals, they might have twice as many points. And a lot of the chances, like Palmer last night, Nicholas Jackson, players are getting into great positions and they're fluffing their lines. And there's not much more a manager can do than set up a system to create those chances. So if then fans feel the chances were not put away because the players are not good enough, then you could say that is on Pochettino, because last night, and I would agree with this, by the way, Amanda Broja should have started and Mudrik's pace should have come on earlier, because on the side that he was playing, Borough were struggling and tired. And they had so many injuries, and two of their injuries that went off were quite fast players. And one of the two that came on was a lot slower and was a fullback. So you had an opportunity for Sterling and for Mudryk to really stretch that Borough line. And then if you're using wide areas and moving sides and changing positions, and you've got a target man in the centre in Broja, I think that would have been really effective. So hindsight's a wonderful thing. And Chelsea also could have scored twice with Cole Palmer in the first half, and then the floodgates might have opened, and we're only halfway through the tie. So there's a whole range of different factors in all of this, but that's probably the Pochettino side that you could criticise. But if you're of the belief that Nicholas Jackson isn't good enough, then that is on the recruitment team, of which Pochettino is not really a figure with any kind of enhanced power. And similarly, if you believe that big chances are just being missed, maybe one day they'll all start going in. And at the same time, there's injuries, and Pochettino's only half a season in. So I think there's lots of variables here. And I understand why it's easy to scapegoat a manager, but I think that there's more to it than that. I think that this is about a project that needs 4 windows to develop a team that's young, have them mature, and maybe next season is the real time to judge Chelsea. And if the ownership feel that that is also true, then Pochettino will be given time. If Pochettino loses to Borough and goes on a run of 6 or 7 bad results, then Chelsea fall into the bottom half of the league. They may then have less points than they did under Graham Potter, and football's a results-driven business. So there's always going to be that slight paradox between wanting to give a manager time and realizing that football is a results-driven business. But the reason Pochettino hasn't been sacked is almost the same reason that Potter wasn't sacked. And that is because, unlike under Roman Abramovich, the ownership group are trying to be less cutthroat. So with Graham Potter, he could have been sacked after the Spurs loss heading into an international break. He could have actually been sacked before the World Cup when I think Chelsea lost to Newcastle. He could have been sacked after the loss to, I believe it was Southampton at home, but Chelsea fans correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. And then eventually he was sacked. And Roman Abramovich would have sacked Graham Potter at all of those junctures. So the Chelsea ownership are delaying. And I would expect the same with Pochettino as well, to try and get to the end of the season and then review in a two-way sense what the issues are, if there are still issues, and to try and get Chelsea finishing the season in European or Champions League form, regardless of where they finish. So they then build momentum, then have a summer. And then I think you'll see a more cutthroat approach, because if they get to that point, they'll then say to Pochettino, you finished the season strong. You've had another window and a summer window. You've had another pre-season. He would then have to start, I think, the first 10 games very strongly. Otherwise, he'd be under real pressure. But it would be surprising to me if he's sacked any earlier, unless there's obviously a catastrophic run of results. And Chelsea fans may be shouting now saying, well, it is a catastrophic run of results. And by, I suppose, Abramovich standards, they're right, because 1 or 2 losses in a Chelsea season is always a mini crisis. It has been historically since the 2000s, but now I think there's an acceptance. And the last thing I would say is that Abramovich's cutthroat changes worked because Chelsea had a senior core. I'm not so sure that Abramovich's cutthroat changes would have worked with the same managers coming in and this squad, because the squad that those new managers inherited were far more experienced and they upped their game. And they got behind a new manager coming in. Now I think the players are a bit more passive and needing of development and instruction because the average squad age is so much younger. And I don't think that the constant chopping and changing under Abramovich would have worked with this squad. And I think that's why also the Chelsea ownership plan on being a little bit more patient. And again, people will be shouting and screaming saying, we don't care. We're Chelsea fans. We pay hard-earned money. Just sack the guy. I'm not in any way diminishing that view. because I'm trying to give you an objective opinion as a journalist, and fans rightly are more blinkered and want instant success. And why not? It's Chelsea. It's a massive club. They should be in the Champions League. They should be winning trophies. It's a fall statistically from grace, regardless of the long-term project. And I can sit here until I'm blue in the face and say patience, project, and people will be saying another word to me beginning with P, and the second word is R, and the third letter is I, and the fourth letter is C, and then I won't complete that spelling, but you'll get abuse if you try and say that, because these other P words like patience and progress and project are probably quite irritating now to Chelsea fans. So hindsight, again, may be a wonderful thing. And by the time we get to mid-August, the Chelsea lineup, the Chelsea injury situation, the Chelsea hierarchy, and the Chelsea performances all may gel. And then everyone will say, oh, thank God, they did have a plan. It did work. But right now, it is very easy to scrutinize and criticize. And I don't blame fans for that, but I still don't think that the ownership will be too swayed by that at this stage. And that's why there's nothing imminent to me that suggests that Pochettino's job is under threat in the days and weeks to follow.
On Chelsea, there was another story I read today that came from Simon Phillips, somebody that I know that you are very familiar with, and the reports that came out from him is that the Chelsea co-owner Eghbali has held positive talks with the agent of Victor Osimhen. We all assume that is more for a summer signing. Are you aware of any progress around this yourself? Have you had any conversations regarding this?
Yeah, I think with Osimhen, we're going to have to wait. Like you say, I'd be really surprised if anything definitive happens in the coming weeks. We get a lot of reports about pre-agreements, and it's not impossible, by the way, that Chelsea try and pre-agree something with a striker, but whether that's Osimhen remains to be seen, because he's only just signed a new deal, and therefore he may wait and take his time. And I think sometimes we look at this through the prism of only Chelsea. And we need to remember that Osimhen is driving Osimhen's exit. And it doesn't matter what Chelsea do. If Victor Osimhen wants to wait and take his time, that's what he'll do. And why, if you think there's going to be multiple suitors in the summer, would you commit to one unless you're 100% sold on the project? Because right now, Osimhen doesn't know where Chelsea are going to finish. He doesn't know whether Arsenal or anyone else is going to enter the race. He doesn't know whether Napoli are going to somehow win the Champions League and he's going to want to stay. He doesn't know whether Saudi are going to come calling again. So does he need to rush his decision? Or is this more about Osimhen signing a new deal with an out that will likely provide a valuation yardstick rather than be triggered, and then his future could well be resolved in the summer? And I think that all suitors know that it's not going to happen in January. And the idea that Chelsea are reaching out or Chelsea are starting talks is, at this stage anyway, let's see if it changes during the window, but largely exaggerated. And the reason for that is because to sign a player at any point, you have to talk to the agent, you have to develop relationships, you have to give a consistent narrative. You can't just rock up in summer and make a bid. And Liverpool are the best at this. I've said this many times. They spend years developing relationships with the family and giving a consistent narrative and explaining the project and ultimately trying as best they can to get players to accept Liverpool, the culture, the city, the club, the squad, and the manager, even if they don't end up signing them. And that's what Chelsea need to start doing to land a big name. This won't just be about Osimhen having a Chelsea shirt and wanting to emulate Drogba. That will be tempting, but the structure, the package, the game time, the manager, it all has to add up. So if you're Osimhen now and Chelsea come calling and say, come and join us, we're a big club, we'll pay you well, we'll give you a 7-year contract and you'll lead us into the Champions League and you'll win it and you'll emulate Didier Drogba. Victor Osimhen's going to probably say, I don't know what you've got next season. I don't know if you've even got Champions League. I don't know where you're going to finish in the league. You can't categorically guarantee who's going to be in charge at hierarchy level or at manager level. What about Nicholas Jackson? What about Amanda Broja? What about even others that could break through like David Datro Fofana? And he'll look at formation as well. So he's a fit in that formation, but it's also not a 4-4-2. So there's only one spot, which means that if someone else starts scoring goals, you're out of the side because Osimhen's not going to drop any deeper like a Christopher and Nkunku. So there's loads of questions, and the answers probably won't come until a little bit further down the line. So it's really easy to create a headline and sort of say Chelsea have started talks, but I don't think we'll get much clarity on Victor Osimhen until later in the year.
Thank you very much regarding that. Viewers, hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribing to The Terrace as well. Turn on those bell notifications so you don't miss any of our content going out. When it comes to Arsenal, of course, there's the Ivan Toney situation. There's been talks this week from Sasha Tavernieri that they're intensifying talks surrounding Onana. He personally believes that deal is going to happen. What's your understanding of the latest in relation to Arsenal? Their fans are desperate for some new signings and new bodies this January. Has there been any movement on those deals or any others in the past 7 days, Ben?
Nothing really for Arsenal. I don't think that will change unless somebody leaves. So Eddie Nketiah still seen as part of Arsenal's plans, despite the fact that Crystal Palace and a few other clubs are looking. And the valuation of Nketiah is relatively transparent, talking to sources, something in the region of 30 to 35 million. But it's not just about money. It's about the fact that Arsenal finished last season lacking depth. It was defensive depth due to Saliba's injury, and they wobbled and they didn't get over the line. They're in a reasonably similar position at roughly the halfway stage of the season, but the difference is there's way more suitors. And as Tottenham have shown, you can jump from first to fifth in the Premier League in the space of just a couple of games. So Arsenal don't have the same cushion, and they're not even top at this stage, but they're in the title race. I think that is absolutely fair to say. Man City, for me, are still the favourites. And I think Liverpool are favourites to finish above Arsenal, but I think it's going to be really tight. And it wouldn't surprise me if there's only 4 or 5 points between first and third, even first and fourth, potentially. So every point matters, and depth is vital. And if Arsenal let Nketiah go, they need to replace him. So it's going to be really difficult with financial fair play for Arsenal to do anything. Toney, again, I think has been prematurely spoken about because he feels like, as he's now said on record and as I've reported in the past, he feels that he's given a lot to Brentford and has got, due to the gambling ban, a fair amount back in return. So there's maybe some repayment needed to Brentford. But as importantly as Toney's desire to maybe stick out the season at Brentford is the fact that Brian Mbeumo is injured and Yohan Wissa's at the African Cup of Nations. So Toney returning in mid-January is vital for Brentford because they're moving in the wrong direction. And without him and his goals, they could easily get sucked into some kind of relegation battle. And I think that knowing that, Brentford will be even more bullish. So the number that Arsenal would require for Toney is minimum 80 million and potentially as high as 100 million. And that's not within Arsenal's budget. And it's all very neat to say, can't they just do what they did with David Raya and agree a structural deal alone with an obligation to buy that ends up suiting all parties? Well, guess what? That doesn't suit Brentford. Brentford need cash if they're to sell Toney. They need a replacement in January because of the 2 players that I've mentioned being injured and away. And they need to do all of that in the next 2 weeks. I just don't see it happening. I wouldn't rule out Toney even signing a new deal at Brentford, but I'd say the stumbling block to that is his wages. And I would also say that free agency, even in 2025, is not out of the question, because when Toney speaks of loyalty, I don't think he means just staying until the end of the season. I think he's very genuine in saying that there's a fair chance he stays at Brentford for even longer, whether that's free agency 2025 or whether that's a new deal with some kind of mechanism that still allows him to leave. So my understanding remains, as I've reported, that yes, Toney would welcome a move from Arsenal, more so than Chelsea. And for Chelsea, he's not necessarily top of their list, even though he's been discussed. But we still might have to wait a fair amount longer to resolve the Toney situation than in the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's a real interesting one, that, because it's the more you read the situation at Burnley. I even think with Brentford being basically in a relegation battle because they're struggling, that makes it even harder. If they were sitting sort of 8th in the league, really comfortable, 10, 15 more points, it could be easier. But you look at the whole scenario, it looks really difficult right now. The other deal that's kind of come up in the last few days has been the Onana deal. It's been played down by a lot of journalists, and I understand why. What's your understanding surrounding this? Can you see Arsenal making this move for Onana in the next 20 days?
No, again, because of the same reason, cost. And even though people are stating rightly that Everton's finances are ropey and this investigation could have, depending on different permutations, various other repercussions, including compensation to other clubs that feel that they were impacted by Everton. The reality is right now, Everton are appealing and they're hoping of getting their 10 points back, or at least some of them back. And they would be looking at something in the region of, I would say, 50, 55 million for Amadou Onana. And that's not really within Arsenal's plan. So unless they can exploit Everton's financial situation and get that price down, it's going to be really difficult. But I'm also not aware of any talks or advancement or offers between Arsenal and Amadou Onana. We know the admiration is there, and it's really easy to be window planning and names to come up. And it's also normal to discuss who's out there in the market. But at this stage, there's nothing more than that. This idea that Onana's agent, who is his sister, is starting talks, this idea that Arsenal are considering dropping 50 million, that's not accurate to my understanding. So I would be downplaying Onana to Arsenal at this stage. It's a long window. You can never rule anything out. In January, you sort of have, I would say, 3 stages that are very different to the summer. You have stage 1 that has parallels, where you've planned your business early because you know it's a short window, and then you announce it in the first few days. You got stage 2, where you move in the early days because you don't want to mess about. And that's what Spurs do. And that's the difference between the summer. Summer, you've got more time. So summer, you get a flurry of business that's pre-planned, but you don't really get a flurry of early negotiations because you don't have to show your hand. You maybe try a few more games. In January, you get a lot of Spurs-type moves where you don't want to mess around. You want to get it done. Then you tend to have a lull because the mid-January football starts in the Premier League. Some players are off for AFCON and the Asian Cup. And after we get past about January the 14th, business slows a little bit. And that's an indication that clubs are not guaranteed to do business, which is why we've not seen Man U sign anyone, which is why we've not seen Chelsea move yet, which is why we've not seen Arsenal make any serious moves yet. Some of that is down to outgoings first, and some of that's down to the fact that the plan is just not that expansive for this mid-season window. And then you get into the final week and there's opportunism, there's last-minute buys, there's pivots. That can be down to results, that can be down to injuries, that can be down to waiting, and then coming at a club at the last minute to try and give them no time to think and get a deal done. So I think we're heading into a little bit of a lull. I think the lull's already started, even though Spurs obviously have got Dragusin over the line. And I think in the next week or so, clubs need to start showing their hand as we head into the final, 10, 12 days of the window. And that's when we might get a late flurry again. So I expect Arsenal to be relatively quiet. I think Liverpool will be quiet. I think that Chelsea will now pick up and show us their hand. We'll find out whether they're going to bring in a striker and a left back. The Conor Gallagher situation will obviously, as far as January is concerned, resolve itself one way or the other. We'll find out whether Newcastle are truly bound by financial fair play in Saudi Arabia. The Henderson situation needs to resolve itself one way or another. But beyond that, as far as either names that Premier League fans know about or Premier League clubs, I think that certainly compared to the last January when Chelsea went nuts, we're in for a relatively conservative window. I hope anyway, because then I can go and get some sleep.
It does feel that way. I mean, 10 days in, I'm just going back and looking at videos from last January. There was so much more activity, so much more genuine noise surrounding these situations. And maybe clubs are a little bit more reluctant to not spend when they've seen what, there's punishments flying about for Everton and other clubs. Maybe people are realizing we better take this FFP thing seriously. We don't want a points deduction. We've got a question here from Strasbourg Steve. He says, Ben, do you have any information on Alphonso Davies, Lewis Ferguson, and potential transfer interest?
Nothing really much on Lewis Ferguson at this point. I think that Alphonso Davies is a really interesting one and one to watch this month. I think that what we're going to see is, in likelihood, a couple of interesting potential Bayern outgoings in 2024 anyway. And one is obviously Alphonso Davies. We know that Real Madrid are keen, but it's also obvious that they may not be able to move in January. And the other thing in all of this is if they are genuine about wanting Mbappe in the next 2 windows, they're going to have to factor in the finances of that to work out what is and isn't possible. The plan for Alphonso Davies, I'm told, is about next season rather than the back half of this season. And Carlo Ancelotti, I think, has said on record that he doesn't really expect much, if anything, this window anyway. So that one's possibility. And then the other one, even though it wasn't in the question, to still keep an eye on, I think, is going to potentially be whether or not there's a possibility out there for Joshua Kimmich. And this one could be PSG. I'm told that there is some sort of genuine substance to that one. I know we've heard links in the past with like Liverpool and a few other clubs. Even Manchester City historically have looked at the player. But I think that Kimmich is one that Bayern will allow to go. So Bayern outgoings are definitely ones to watch over the course of the next 2 windows.
Yeah, the Kimmich one's interesting. A lot of City fans, I keep seeing, like, when I'm live streaming, people are like, oh, Kimmich to Man City's happening, and I don't see any news about it anywhere, but a lot of people talk. Again, that's an interesting one because I think he's such a player. Again, anyone who picks him up is going to be getting an absolute bargain. Now, look, Ben, I know you've got to shoot, mate, because you've got a hard stop now. I'm going to stay on a stream with the viewers for a little bit longer myself, but I want to thank you as ever, Ben, for coming on, giving us your views, giving us your opinions, and I'm sure we'll speak again this time next week. Hopefully with some good updates. And that's not a dig at you. You don't control the market. Ben isn't he's standing there saying don't do any deals. But I thank you as ever, mate, for coming on.
Look forward to it. We'll speak next week, no doubt. All the best, everyone.
Cheers, take care. Thank you, mate. Bye-bye. Thank you very much, Ben. Look, I want to get your views and I want to get your opinions, on, the current situation, how things currently look. Because I understand people are frustrated. Their clubs are not doing much business. Why is Poch staying? Man United. I mean, you look at Guirassy as an example, 17 million. How have our clubs got to a state where there isn't 17 million pounds available? Genuinely, how have we got to that point? Arsenal not doing any business. I think it's an abomination with where they are. I'm not saying buy a player that's substandard, but no business. Chelsea, they need some experience. How are they not doing anything? How are they not doing anything with where they currently sit, the situation they're in? The only 2 teams, I think, that can get away with doing nothing is Liverpool, who keep getting better and better, and of course, Man City, who are still the best team in the world. They're still the best team in the world. KDB, Haaland coming back. They're probably going to be okay. Everybody else, why are we doing so little? My club, your club. Spurs have gone out and signed 2 players. Now, I'm not saying I want Timo Werner, but it's a player that Big Hans Postecoglou wants. They're going to go Drăgușin. And by the way, he rejected Bayern Munich. And a lot of people are saying you can't say that. You can say that. You can say it because his agent has come out and said, this is the words, and I verbatim, the agent of Drăgușin has said, we can't believe we turned down Bayern. Radu had given his word to Spurs and chose to respect this. We are all still mind blown a bit. The agent has confirmed they rejected Bayern Munich. Spurs have done it. And I know FFP, look. FFP is a thing, Terry. Stop asking the clubs to breach it. Well, we can go through this because I actually went and did some research on this the other day. And there isn't any new information on this. However, this is genuine. This exists. I'm just going to go to my bookmarks here, okay? Okay, because I bookmarked it the other day. Where is it at? Where's my bookmark history? Bookmark manager, that will do. That's the same thing. Let me scroll down because I bookmarked it the other day. Where is it? Where are you at? Where are you at? Oh, why can't I find it now? Maybe I didn't bookmark it. I'll just Google it instead. Ownership investment Premier League. Okay, I want to break this down for you. Okay, so I'll probably find it in a moment. I think this is the one. Here it is. I found it. I did like it. I did star it, but it didn't show up. Anyway, let's have a little look. So this document here shows, okay, investment from owners over the past 10 years. Okay, so from 2012 to 2021. So waiting for an update on this. Okay, Manchester City's owners have invested £684 million in that period of time into their club. Chelsea's owners, up until that point, this is Roman, 516. We've just seen Chelsea, by the way, owners invest a further £140 million into the club. Now, not all of that can be used for transfers. There's a limit to that, but they've just done it. Aston Villa's owners, 506 million. Fulham's owners, 456 million. Brighton's owners, 312 million. Arsenal's owners have invested 211. Liverpool's owners, 110. Man United's owners have taken out 154 million. Zero investment. So the point I'm making to you is this. I understand, as the current accounts read, there could be FFP issues. But Arsenal, Man United, at the very least, they can go out and their owners can invest money into the club. It isn't a good enough excuse for me. Let me rephrase that. It's not a good enough reason. It's a convenient excuse. There are ways to circumvent this, and it isn't just selling players. Raise some money. Borrow some money. There's a way around of doing this because there's a desperate need for some additions. Now, I'm not saying do it and then buy a substandard player. Don't borrow £20 million and then buy some dead forward, some bang average midfield player. Don't do that. That's stupidity. Absolute stupidity. But this notion that FFP is a problem that can be resolved. Can be. Especially for Man United. You actually look at these stats. The fact that Brighton's owners, who are nowhere near as rich as ours, have invested over 300 million into their club. The only teams that have invested exponentially more than Brighton into their club is Villa, Chelsea, and Man City. The fact that they've invested more than Arsenal, more than Wolves, more than Leeds, more than Liverpool. Brighton invested 3 times more than Liverpool have. 3 times more than Liverpool. And don't ever let the media BS you as well. Often they say, Man United have invested £600 million in new players. Yeah, Man United has. The Glazers haven't. Don't be sort of gaslit into believing that. It's a simple and a straightforward. We can't afford Guirassy at United. Still don't kind of believe it myself. The Glazers are rotten to the core. Of course they are. Of course they are. They say misery loves misery. Chelsea, United, and Arsenal have serious entanglement. Their missteps and humiliation are directly correlated to each other. Listen, I will say this now. I don't think you can put Arsenal into the same category as Chelsea and Man United right now. They're in a title race. They're in the knockout stage of the Champions League. They've had a bad couple of weeks and it deserves criticism. I still think their fans should be demanding some signings. But you can't compare Arsenal's current predicament with Man United and Chelsea. Let's just say the reasons they're struggling now is because Arteta's made mistakes. They could quite simply sack Arteta, bring in a better manager, and Arsenal are still going to be flying. I can't say the same for Chelsea and Man United. I don't think they're comparable right now, personally. The billionaire has never put money into these modern clubs that spin $1 billion a year. They spin $1 billion a year each. I mean, billionaires have pumped money into their clubs. That's just, they may do it for a mechanism where it's via a business they own. And that will be more for tax purposes. But multiple clubs in the Premier Leagues, millionaire and billionaire owners have invested into the club. Wolves, Arsenal, Brighton, Villa, Fulham, Chelsea, Man City, definitely. Newcastle will certainly have, since this document was released. And Newcastle will be huge. Newcastle's investment is going to be hundreds of millions in the last couple of years. There's no doubt about it. Terry with Arsenal glaze. There's no Arsenal glaze. I don't really understand where you're coming from. Mike Ashley invested nothing. In the 10 years before Mike Ashley sold Newcastle, Mike Ashley's investment was minus £29 million. Again, they spent money, but they spent the club's money. He took more out than he put in. Stop talking about ownership investment at clubs that has been brought as They have been bought as self-sustaining models and have been run as such over 20 years. Again, I can take that argument on board, yes, but they could also invest. You know, if I'm running a business and we're doing well, let's just say I'm running my estate agency and it's doing well. We're taking on a lot of listings, we're selling a lot of houses, but we want to go to that next level and we're on the edge. We just need to employ someone. The business doesn't quite have the capital though, Terry. You know, we need that for 6 months working capital. We can't quite dip our pockets into it. We need to protect the business. Imagine me as a part owner saying, I can see it's going to make us even more money, but I'm not going to invest because I want a self-sustaining model. No, you say, right, well, what's the person going to cost to employ? 35,000 year one. Okay, well, there's £40,000. Let's get that person. There's a little bit of a buffer on there as well. Let's make this work. Boy, your name is Boy. Hello, Boy. You're talking nonsense. I'm not saying that FFP isn't a reason to slow spending down, but let's not pretend that it can't be circumvented through owner investment. And multiple businesses get owner investment. And by the way, Chelsea's owners have just put £140 million more in. Newcastle have put hundreds of millions in. But this is where you're wrong as well, by the way. Up until 2021, so it has changed since then, only four of the Premier League clubs in that period didn't invest any money into their club. All the rest did. So 16 of the 20 clubs are not the models you're talking about. So you're chatting fart, bruv. You're chatting pure fart. Pure fart, protecting your owners for not doing the most. And again, no one said FFP is not real. I'm sorry to get rude, you fool. No one said it isn't real. But I said it's too much of a convenient excuse. Now, for Newcastle, their owners have invested the maximum amount. So that makes sense. But when you're a club that hasn't invested and there is leeway to invest, it isn't a reason. Because if Newcastle right now had the leeway to invest another £100 million towards transfers, their owners would do it. City's owners would do it. Chelsea's have. You're wrong, my friend. You're wrong on every single level. You're wrong on every single level. And I understand that some clubs want to have a self-sustaining model, and I get that. And that's what you ideally want. You want enough money coming in. You want enough profitability to be self-sustaining. But there's moments in time where it's not, because some clubs might go for broke and buy 4 or 5 players to try and win the league, and it goes wrong. The manager gets it wrong. The players don't quite work out. And then later down the line with the way you're paying, we're going to hit a little bit of an FFP issue here. I say screw the self-sustaining model. Look, do you know what we're going to do? We're going to write off some of that debt. We're going to invest another £100 million of our own money. Now we're going to bring in some new sponsors to increase the revenues. We're going to do some bits and pieces to raise some more money so we can go for it again. That's what we want for our clubs, surely. We don't want our clubs just being, it's crazy. Absolutely crazy. Operating costs versus give me transfers. Again, these clubs should not be run to make profit for the board, to grow share price. They should be run to create the best football team ever. And like I've said, I get you want a self-sustaining model as a general rule, but then there are anomaly moments. And right now, a bit of investment from their owners is fine. Again, you're talking about this like we're on the Dragon's Den and you're looking for a return on your investment. These are not businesses in the conventional sense, or they shouldn't be. Yes, you want them to be self-sustaining. Yes, you want them to be profitable if they can be. But most football clubs are not. They're about creating the best football team in the world, and there are times and there are moments where you should invest more. No one is saying invest so much money that the club could go bankrupt. Again, you're taking it to the extremities, and we're not doing that here today, my friend, but we're moving on from that conversation. I want Newcastle to bring in a loan player or two this window. Well, that makes a lot of sense. That is definitely doable. Aston Villa are huge spenders. Terry, did you see they got the Adidas deal? We can't assume that even the clubs of the likes of Villa aren't spending. Fair point. Look, again, it's not just about spending. And this is what I'm saying to people. This isn't you, Kenobi, and I think the world has gone this way. Everybody is like, people vote for political parties because of one policy or one ideological view. Everything's very polarized nowadays, where most situations are not. You shouldn't spend if the player isn't going to improve your team to a decent level. Don't spend 30 million on a player that you think substandard. That makes sense. I'm not asking any club to do that. That is a waste of the money. But if you've got a target, for instance, Onana, who is a higher priority midfield target, and he's going to cost 50 million, but you've only got 30 million to spend, I think it's right that the ownership, instead of going, we can't, guys, FFP, these billionaires, by the way, go, we're going to invest the extra 20 million because we really want to make this bit of business work. That there, I think, is sensible. I really, really do. Even if it's not investing money from the owner's pocket, there are other financial levers a club can use. Look at Bayern. Yeah, listen, absolutely. And I'm not saying copy Bayern's model because, Barcelona's model, because they're in trouble. But there are multiple ways this can be done. I just think people go FFP and they use it as a bit of an excuse to do nothing. And then they defend their club for doing nothing. And I just think to myself, I think you're being a little bit of a simp here. I think you're not being honest with yourself. I really, really do think you're not being honest with yourself. You know, it's a bit like when people used to celebrate. Remember when people used to celebrate net spend? Oh, we got great net spend. But generally speaking, good net spend means your best players want to leave or you're not very ambitious. Why are they things to celebrate? I've never, ever in my whole life understood the general rule of, I've got good net spend. Also, we know net spend isn't real. You know, we know net spend isn't real in the basic format that it's been used in. So, yeah, it is what it is. Terry, would you take Paolo Maldini as a sporting director? Yeah, look, I would. I would. Again, I feel like Man United need big, isn't just big names, because big name doesn't mean you're going to be good at your job, but it's about having people that have been there, done it, and worn the t-shirt. People that are going to, especially when it comes to negotiating to buy and sell players, you want people walking into a room who create respect. I've also read some really good things about Maldini's abilities in a sort of corporate areas of football, the business areas of football. So, yeah, look, I wouldn't mind that at all, my friend. Football is dying because you man can't fathom solutions having to be unearthed from inside clubs. This is where you're wrong, though, my friend. I'm not asking for the club to do anything different to what they've done for 130 years. Outside investment has happened since the 1800s. It's just more money now because inflation in the world in general, and there's more money in the game. But just go and research how Liverpool were partly able to be so dominant in the 70s and 80s. It was to do with sponsorship deals that they generated through partnerships their owners had with those sponsorships, which generated huge amounts of money. Look at how Blackburn were able to compete and became one of the best teams in England for a period. Look how Chelsea and City became who they are today. Even when you look at it from a perspective of why Man United is so big and so popular, Man United had these ideas and we did things to generate income from outside the club inwards. Style of football, playing in Europe. People don't even do your history on why Man United pushed to play in Europe and how the FA wanted Man United not to do it. They didn't want football being shared across the area. And Man United's plan was, one, it would grow football, two, it would grow our name. Adding boxes into stadiums so you could sell tickets at a higher value to generate additional income external from the club, so you could reinvest it into the team. Crowdfunding, local funding, all these things have played a part in keeping football clubs alive over the years. What do you think TV sponsorship money is? Why do you think clubs go on pre-season tours? Partly to raise money in that instance, but it's also to grow their fan base. So more external money comes into the club versus rivals. It's why I will never buy the shirt of any club around the world other than Man United. And I won't buy Man United right now either because the Glazers are there. I will never put a single penny of my money into any other club as best I can. Of course, if you go to an away game, you're doing that, but that's to support your team. I won't buy a PSG shirt. I'm not going to further their endeavors on the pitch by giving them additional external money. But PSG have confused you all. Oh my God, that kit's so lush, I'm going to buy it. You're helping another club succeed. You're a mug. I find it mad how people have been brainwashed into it. So your point that all solutions should just be done internally is a nonsense. External support of individual clubs, leagues, and football has been going on since its birth, my friend. You are so wrong It's sobering. You could make a drunk sober in 10 seconds reading that nonsense. My word. Listen, do us a big favor, please, and smash the like button. Please make sure you are subscribing. I enjoy the intellectual duels, especially with Boy. It was fun. Terry, I've already answered that question. I was about to answer another one. Listen, until next time, my people, take care of yourselves. Goodbye. God bless. And I'll see you all again very, very